So I would say the work that DBSA is currently doing around biodiversity is the most currently exciting for me. In the previous comment, I said that, the lack of capital that flows into adaptation projects. So part of what we're doing, we're looking at ways to finance, nature. So DBSA is currently involved in partnership with a local bank to design a biodiversity bond that's going to look at conservation activities, conservation activities in South Africa. So we're looking at, innovative ways of financing, reading of alien invasive species to create, to preserve our water bodies. We're looking at ways to preserve, for example, lion populations in South Africa. So those are some of the interesting things that we are doing, and I'm most excited about, because as we all know, we are all connected to nature, and nature is connected to us. And as long as we do not take active steps proactively to preserve our ecosystems, everybody is affected, and it takes all of the brains to get around a room and to say, how do we creatively finance nature activities and in a way that is sustainable. So that is the work that currently excites me, and it's a space that's also globally has received a lot of attention recently. So we look forward to also just look at what the rest of the world has done and replicating those same solutions, and hopefully replicating them in the rest of the African continent as well. So the private sector is a very important player in terms of the fight against climate change in Africa. Firstly, the most important reason, being that it is clear that DFIs cannot, or public institutions cannot fund the gap alone. The gap is massive, and we do need partners in order to fund projects in the climate space on a sustainable basis. So the important role that private sector has, one, is increasing the pool of capital that's available to finance projects in the African continent. And I think importantly also is the competences that private sector does bring that may not necessarily be available from public sector. For instance, private sector is developed competences in developing infrastructure projects on a commercial basis. So there's opportunity then to partner and to finance climate resilient infrastructure, for example, renewable energy, green buildings, and e-mobility, to reduce Africa's vulnerability to climate related disasters, which are on the increase. So there's also opportunity for private sector to fund climate tech. Private sector has already developed competencies, for instance, in driving the investment in innovation and technology. So private sector could then drive that very same competencies that they've developed in investing in specifically green technologies and climate tech. There's opportunities, for example, for climate smart agriculture in the African continent. There's opportunity to look at ways to finance tech that speaks to those, because those are issues that are particularly relevant in the African continent. But also in co-designing financing mechanisms that are relevant for the African environment, designing, for example, impact bonds and green bonds that speak and respond to African problems. So an event like AGES is very important, to bring, firstly, key role players in Africa to collaborate in financing climate initiatives in the continent. With the recent developments that we are seeing globally, that developed countries are tapering back funds to emerging economies in terms of supporting them to fund climate initiatives. So it is clear that Africa has to look within in terms of finding financing solutions and collaborating in projects in order to create the scale that is required to finance projects in Africa. So I think an event like AGES was very instrumental in doing that, because firstly it connects role players in Africa Africa. So the different development finance institutions that were at the platform, the different investors, VC capital investors that were there, also project sponsors that are engaged in projects in Africa. Yeah, I mean, what I would like to add is that, firstly, we look forward to Ages 2026. I think that's going to be, a game changer. What we would like to see, especially for Ages 2026, is, integration of SMMEs and the role that they can play in the climate finance space. And I think there's a very unique role that SMEs in the green economy, can potentially play. And that conversation is not always, they're not always put to the fore in terms of what opportunities are available, and especially given that the African continent, is especially, young startups, and there's huge potential for those businesses to be at the center of Africa's decarbonization and greening agenda. And I look forward to 2026 Ages that also has a very strong focus on that.